Hello and welcome back to the EMJ GOLD podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Hi Jade, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing, Isabel?
Very good, thank you. Looking forward to sharing today's episode.
I hear it's a very exciting one. What have we got coming up today?
So today we're going to be sharing a really interesting conversation that I recently had with Angelo Auricchio.
Angelo was recently appointed as the Chief Medical Officer of Rhythm Management at Boston Scientific, and that was a move he made back in September 2024, I think.
Yeah.
And at Boston Scientific, he works across the EMEA region there. But prior to his time in industry, he has accumulated a real wealth of experience in the academic and medical fields. He was actually the editor-in-chief of the EP Europace journal over at the European Society of Cardiology, and he's also acted as the president of the European Heart Rhythm Association. So it's very clearly a very distinctive field that he's definitely interested in.
Yeah, he's really, really passionate about cardiology, and that really comes throughout our conversation as well. He's also got 2 professorships in 2 universities and a wealth of other experience. So yeah, very, very experienced to be talking on this topic today. He's very dedicated to public awareness around heart care, and yeah, that really shines through as well throughout our conversation.
Yeah, it's a really good cause to be interested in as well, I think. I'm excited to listen in. Shall we get into the conversation?
Let's do it. So, Angelo, welcome to the EMJ Gold podcast. It's lovely to have you on today. How's it going?
Well, thank you, and thank you for a great opportunity to talk to you today. It's really quite nice. First time with the EMJ Gold, so I'm very excited.
Well, hopefully it'll be the first of many, Angelo. Very much looking forward to talking to you today and about a really interesting topic. So for our listeners, we're going to be diving into the role of remote cardiac monitoring quite significantly today. We're going to be looking at some new innovations, how they could potentially address inequalities, and also what could be lying ahead in the future. So lots to get through. But Angelo, before we do get into the cardiac monitoring questions, I would love to know a little bit about you, because you have just made quite a big role change in recent times. I think it was September 2024 that you took on the role as Chief Medical Officer at Boston Scientific's Rhythm Management business here in Europe. So I'm keen to know, this is a bit of a departure from what you've been doing before. So what motivated you to make the move?
Well, it is indeed a big move. I mean, I spent my, say, 33 decades or 35 years of clinical activities, so taking care of a patients, doing science, and I've done many, many other things, but probably one of the most interesting activities I had during my long career was essentially to perform clinical trials, and of course, I really always like to be engaged with innovation. So this was really my greatest passion, I would say. And now, thinking forward or thinking what is going to be in the future, I thought that that might be probably a different way of addressing clinical unmet clinical needs, to addressing or to improve patients' care by eventually going to the industry, because industry, typically speaking, is 3, 5, even 7 years ahead of time. So, and of course, if you want to anticipate the time, if you want really to go even in the future, I think that is really a great opportunity for me to go to industry. And I have to say, I'm very happy that Boston, of course, offered me this opportunity. It is a very important role in the organization, in the industry, and so I think also the reason why I think I started with Boston is certainly because most of my career has been, say, very close to the company as a customer, but also someone who has been engaged in many of the clinical research activities and R&D. But also because I believe that Boston Scientific has been probably one of the most innovative companies in the field of cardiac devices and electrophysiology. So, and this has also been the company which has an incredibly long tradition in performing clinical trials and always trying to find really those areas which really matter to physicians like myself. So essentially, changing the world of clinical guidelines has been one of probably greatest goal for clinical science in Boston in the past and now. So that's just one of the reasons why I think I'm say, well, probably Boston is a good company for me to start with.
Mm. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Interesting to hear why you decided to join the industry itself and also why Boston felt like the right place for you to make that transition. Yeah, very interesting pathway for you to have taken. I think something we're quite keen to talk about today is reform and what role remote monitoring in the cardiac space can play in this. Here in the UK, technology is a big part of Labour's plans for the healthcare system. And talking of Boston Scientific, they have a new system called the HeartLogic system. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about this system and what role you think it could play in the reform of healthcare systems like the NHS.
Well, very good question. I have to say, probably before to go to your second part of the question, which is about how technical is done. Probably if I probably help you understanding what is the context, the clinical context in which this technology might be of help. I mean, in UK, but the figures are very close to other European countries. People estimate that about 1 million of the people may be affected by heart failure. So it is really an epidemic. And about 200,000 cases are newly diagnosed every year. Again, this is not a UK disease, it's a European disease, it's a world disease. That is something that we should really recognize. And the other important aspect, and this is really where the money are going to be spent, is hospitalization. So, on average, every patient with heart failure spend on average in UK 9 days. And this is not because of the system, the in-hospital system, or because of the physicians are poor doctors or because the nurses are poor doctors. In contrast, I mean, they are excellent, outstanding physicians, outstanding nurses. The problem is that really the disease, so when it comes to the compensation, it takes a lot of time before the patients can recover, can really bring into a state that, and then you start with new medication and you get all the water out of a lung, out of the of legs and of other part of the body before you can really think of a patient that can go home and continue his life home. So this is really something which is very important to understand. And because of that, this is an extremely costly therapy. You know, every hospitalization is really a major cost. Again, not only in UK, but in Europe, even in Switzerland, which is a country that I'm practicing last, the story is repeating itself. So it is very deadly disease, very costly disease. So about, I think in UK in particular, is about 2% of the healthcare spend are related to heart failure and heart failure hospitalization, essentially. Now, interesting is also the fact that in UK, there is certainly a significant disparities between people who can afford and people who cannot afford a certain type of care. So, and this is now, I think, well, in all these contexts is where solutions like HeartLogic may really help and really help a lot. So the way in which HeartLogic works is essentially is embedded into a device that the patients receive. Typically speaking, is what we call cardiac resynchronization therapy device. So essentially, it's a device which helps the heart to pump more efficiently and effectively, but can be also be present in other devices. And this device, which is like a very big pacemaker, has in within has a number of sensors. So sensors which capture important physiological changes. So every time that the patients, for example, exercise, every time that the patient is going to sleep, every time that the patient is is having water in the lung, so the device can capture all these changes, and of course, if you can make a very intelligent way of interpreting the information coming from the different sensors, you can provide a sort of alert or one number which tells you this patient's cross the alert now in needs or requires attentions. So that is exactly how HeartLogic works. So essentially, derive or takes data from the patients, transfer this data to the hospital, to eventually nurse practitioners, and inform them that something is changed in the situation of the patients, in the status of the patients, which require the attention. And these people in the hospital or in the field then go back to the patients and prescribe therapies or see the patients, and they start to do something. So this is really the way in which the system works. And now we have data, or we have quite a good number of studies showing that our devices is capable to detect impending hospitalization about a month before it's happened. So really long time ahead of the event. And this is something which is very important because you now have time to do something. So instead to think of a patient who arrive in the emergency room, which really call the doctor, I don't feel well. I'm really, really terrible with my breath, or I don't feel well. So this is really important because the fact that you can not only receive information or so many days, weeks before, but also you can receive information remotely. So essentially, someone from the hospital, even the fact if a patient is 100 miles away, we transmit the information. And now, for specifically for patients who cannot have really the joy to have a car or can be immediately at the hospital, then in that case, I mean, they can really um, essentially receive the attention that they deserve, even if they do live in remote areas.
Thank you so much for that context. That was really interesting to kind of see how it's also a cost-effective option for hospitals, but also it offers quite a lot of benefit to patients as well. I actually was having a conversation last week with someone about cardiac outcomes in women and how, they often are late
Okay.
to diagnosis and, how they get misdiagnosed. So you can kind of see how this technology would also be helpful in that regard. So yeah, very interesting. And thank you for giving the context. I suppose, where are you at currently with HeartLogic? How prevalently is it being used? And thinking more broadly, how do we get more technology like this into healthcare systems like the NHS, where the infrastructure can at times be outdated? Yeah, is that a challenge that you have on your hands?
Well, I understood that the NIH, of course, faces significant challenges in the digital transformation. And this is a challenge, I would say, that is probably not only unique to UK. This is a major, major problem across Europe and probably worldwide. But with that, there is also an additional issue, which is budget constraint. Again, not only a UK only disease, I would put in this way, but also in general, we have really similar problem. So I understood that the NHS is trying to achieve essentially of to have three major goals. One is taking care from the hospital to community, which is a very smart way of reducing costs, of course, because we know that again every time that you're spending time in a hospital is a very not only cost intense but also has a number of additional implications for that. And sometimes you even don't need an hospital, you just need a little to be done home. So this is, I think, also an important way of thinking. The other things, of course, moving from analog to digital. Everyone was used to use paper. Nowadays paper is obsolete. Everyone has a smartphone, has the possibility to communicate remotely. So why not to use that technology? I mean, why you don't implement more and more aggressively digital care? Of course, this requires significant investment in the infrastructure, because if you want to transfer large amount of data, you really need to have a high performing IT system which works for you. And the other third, I think, priority for HNS and is essentially moving from sickness to prevention. Again, very smart move. And HeartLogic is exactly prevention of and hospitalization, prevention of disease progression, if you like. So this is, I think, also the way where technologies like HeartLogic can really help very much, because it is not only the fact that they are able to anticipate from so many months or so many days or weeks before, but also because they leave a patient's home, so they stay in the community, and at the same time, they are patient centric. So essentially, you don't need to move the patients from home, but essentially you have all the different healthcare system rotating around the patients. So, and because of sensor, hospital, nurses, practitioners, and the patient's back, so it's a sort of circle that you can really have around the patient. So in this way, if you like, in a few words, this is really the transformation in digital remote follow-up. I would say is a must to have these days. I mean, if we want to effectively use our technology, it is really the way to go. But also, and it's also important to say that not every system looks the same, but they're not the same. So important to say that adoption of a proven and highly reliable technology is equally important. So, and this is really from time to time again what looks like the same, but at the end of the day, does not. And just because of a device does not have the same number of sensors is because the way in which the architecture, the IT architecture works, the way in which the system interpret the different signals is not the same. Again, this is really matters very much in terms of creating really high reliable technology like HeartLogic.
And what has been the patient response to this kind of technology? Has it generally been an overwhelmingly positive one? Have you encountered any skepticism?
Well, usually patients welcome very much the technology. They welcome the technology for a number of reasons, I would say. First of all, I think is a peace of mind. So patients know that the fact that they do transmit on regular basis, so it is like daily or weekly, they know that someone on the other side is looking at them, so is caring of them. And that is something which provides the patient himself to say, you know what, I, I mean, of course, I do need to care of myself. I need to do something, but I'm also know that if something is going wrong or starting to go in the wrong direction, someone on the other side is really starting thinking of what is ongoing. And usually, the way in which the system, at least it was organized in my past hospital, for example, we had always a nurse in the hospital who, by the time or by the moment that the patients was transmitting an information, so the nurses was calling the patient, say, "Are you doing well? Is something wrong with you?" And so this is really, again, even if the patient is not physically coming to the hospital or the nurse is not going home with the patient, but say at least there is a contact, and this is a way to assess how the patient is doing. And sometimes even from the voice, from the way in which the patients they tell how they do feel, that helps much in understanding these small changes. So the other things is also for family and care and patients, say caregivers, because they also are reassured that the dad, the father, the mother is really someone who is really in a good way. It is considered and taken care in the right way. So this is, I think, is also one of the reasons why these systems are usually extremely successful. You know, of course, the moment that the patients they don't, he or she does not feel well, he has always the possibility to trigger an alert. And when you trigger an alert, this means something I don't feel well, so I really need to care now. Of course, this is not an emergency system. This is important to emphasize. So it's not the way that you say, I don't feel well, I call the ambulance. No, this is a way that say to start to indicating or to sending signals something with me is not any longer good.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you can see the potential for remote monitoring beyond cardiac conditions as well. There must be so many different applications for this kind of technology. Do you think is cardiology ahead of the game, or are there other really promising applications of this that you're excited about? I know cardiology is your area, but
Yeah, well, cardiology is my area, is my passion,
yeah,
is my love,
yeah.
I would say. But in general, I believe that in cardiology, we're very much ahead of time. There is probably another area which is now upcoming more and more is in the area of diabetes, for example, because they have similar issues, and so, but generally speaking, cardiologists really, really very much ahead of time. Because just because all this remote monitoring was born with the idea of looking at or providing the patients with the opportunity to interrogate from remote the devices, so to provide information about the device function. And also the idea there was, you don't need much electronic or internet literacy to interact with a device like this one. So this was the reason why cardiology was so ahead, because it's simple to use, it's very, very simple to deliver information, and also very simple to communicate with. Now, the field is evolving because technology is evolving. Nowadays, so in the past year, we gave the patients like a sort of uh, hint, access to internet, because they do need to have a box home where they use for transmitting from the device to this box and then to the hospital. But now the new generation, the new technology is using an Apple. So an application on your mobile phone. So essentially, you don't need to have external devices, but you can use your own telephone. So on your telephone, you have an application that you can download. You don't need to do much. Just say you can again starting the interrogation of a device, transmitting information, and there are some apps where you can also give, you can interrogate the patients how he or she feels, and again there are a number of novel way of also providing consultations, essentially from remote consultation, if you like. Last and not least is certainly the ability that we have in some of our devices the possibility to remotely programming the device. So in other words, you can not only interrogate but also you can program. Why is that important? Because the moment that I see some arrhythmia or some changes, I may change the pattern, the setting of my device in order to become more sensitive or less sensitive, in order to have more information, to provide me more information with a different frequency. This is also something which is really future. And this really helps very much again in when you think about quality of life of patients, but also again healthcare cost reduction, because you don't need to travel again to the hospital office or to the office of a doctor to the hospital in order to do just a simple what mark programming or reading of your pacemaker, of your device, of your defibrillator. Again, very, very nice technology. And in the future, all these things are becoming more and more powerful. The other things is interpretation of the data, because of course data interpretation. We have now new way of probably using technology. For example, artificial intelligence is becoming now more and more effective. So this is another way that you can use in order to post-process data and to provide, say, to make prediction.
Super interesting. And I think what keeps coming up is whatever's good for the healthcare system in terms of cost often is actually better for the patient in terms of their experience, which
Absolutely,
I think is
absolutely.
really interesting and also a very good thing. You touched on kind of the future of these technologies. Do you think that where we're at now is just scratching the surface, or do you just think we'll improve the current technology, or do you think there's something, beyond what we're doing now that could really take hold and be valuable?
Well, I think we are already at the point where probably was not thinkable a few years ago. We are already very, very advanced in our way of handling our patients. So again, if you think of optimization or optimizing hospital triage and reducing readmission, I think HeartLogic and is really an extremely nice way of delivering care, but also again the efficiency and also lowering the cost, having or continue to do better in the say with the empower patients, or having more in-depth and greater granularity in the data of the patients. Uh, that is really something which certainly will further help in the future.
Hmm. Very interesting. Well, Angelo, thank you so much for joining me today. We're not quite finished, but I've really enjoyed that conversation around remote monitoring and the potential there. I've definitely learned a few things that I didn't know already, so thank you for that. You mentioned earlier how you love cardiology; it's your one true passion, and that's very clear looking at your career and also hearing you speak. Um, why are you so passionate about this area? What is the thing that sort of gets you out of bed in the morning to work in what you do? And then finally, what's something that keeps you up at night? What's a challenge that maybe you don't know the answer to and you'd love to have it one day?
This is really a good question. I would say I never. Well, I don't know, but probably I would probably answer to this point is, as a physicians, my goal is really to improve the quality of life and the life expectancy of my patients. So this is really for me by far the most important things. So everything that you can do, in other words, every solution, technical solution, innovative solution. And there are so many startups company around that sometimes that they do start novel concept. And so understanding or say which is the next company that may really make the change. So try to understand how all these new therapies are going, and but also which are the most cost effective. This is really something that really keeps me busy. I would say very, very busy. During the night and during the day. But also, I'll probably say which would be the clinical study that really may have value to, again, to a patient's life and to their symptoms. So, which is really the question that I need to answer in order to significantly improve that. This is really from time to time. It is not an easy question because depends from not only technology, from new understanding. So this is just a few things, and that you know from time to time it is a tough call to have say what I can do better or what I can do differently for my patients.
Yeah, not an easy job, I imagine. And what about that challenge? What is something that really keeps you awake at night around cardiology that you would love to solve?
Ah, uh, challenges. There are many. Every time that I think probably patient safety is probably by far is the biggest challenges. Again, safety and efficacy of our therapy. So this is really the biggest challenge is how we can improve the efficacy of our therapies. So how we can make them more and more safer. Because in the end of the day, we don't want to lose any single patients. We want really to provide the best quality of care to the patient. So this is really the challenge I may have, or I try to solve. At the end of the day, what I try to do during my sleepless night, or when you wake up during the sleepless night, you say, you wake up in the morning and say, today is another good day where you should have probably one good idea which really helps our patients. So, in that sense, probably this is really at least for me, the way to go.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful mantra, Angelo. Thank you very much for sharing those with me. And thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to hear your thoughts on the topic. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Isabel. I think it was a really great conversation to listen into. Have you got a favourite moment that you can pull out from your chat?
As ever, of course. Yeah, I really love talking to Angelo. He was brilliant. And I want to highlight kind of what I mentioned at the end of the interview there, how closely linked improving the patient experience and saving costs for healthcare systems is. That was something that really stood out to me throughout the conversation. And yeah, remote monitoring is a really perfect example of how that can work. Enhancing patient care while also making systems more efficient. It's really a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely win-win there. I really like that point too. Personally, I really enjoyed hearing Angelo's point on how remote monitoring technology can help patients feel more calm and secure in their treatment journey too. As you mentioned, patient experience is so important. Beyond the obvious benefit of, just staying in your own home or going about life as usual, there's also that real reassurance in knowing someone is keeping an eye and monitoring your health in the background. So it's, quite a calming thing.
Very reassuring, I imagine. Very exciting. But unfortunately, that is all we have time for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back again next week. And thank you to Angelo, of course, for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.